Nice to meet you. I'm Prof.Joun. The title of this webinar is Plate Forging Simulation, including bulk metal forming simulation of sheet materials. First, I would like to introduce AFDEX. Then, I will present some schemes for plate forging simulation with verifications. Finally, I will draw a conclusion after introducing some typical applications. This figure shows the configuration of AFDEX. AFDEX is theoretically based on rigid or elasto-thermoviscoplastic finite method. It has strong points of solution accuracy, intelligent remassing, and user-friendliness. It has many good unique functions including grain flow visualization and optimization, and fully automatic simulation of multi-stage processes from 26 years ago when AFDEX was first used in the industry. We also established very powerful international partnerships for research and development with Altair, Purdue University in USA, JSOL, the largest software company in Japan, BRIMAD, the only integrated research institute of metal forming and heat treatment in China, RI, the representative research institute of automobiles in India, and the like. I'm going to show you some selected examples which can imply the accuracy of our predictions. The upper three are for 2D and the lower two are for 3-dimensional. These three examples compare the predictions with experiment in terms of grain flow. They are quite good. This compares the response of oscillatory force due to ball oscillation during a special lower surface hardening process. This compares the shapes of experiments and predictions. All comparisons in this slide show the accuracy of AFDEX. We have made numerous comparisons between our predictions with experiment, which can be found from our homepage. Remassing is of great importance. In structural engineering, the more advanced FE mass system, the better the result. It's true, of course. To the contrary, in bulk metal forming, small finite elements may cause too frequent remassing, especially around sharp concave corner. So the appropriate element size for metal forming process exists, which trades off the interpolation error and remassing error. When the mass system describes the material with acceptable accuracy, it can be a good engineering solution. You can see that all mass systems here describe the material with good geometric accuracy in terms of the tolerance. For example, these chamfered corners were well described with limited number of finite elements. From now on, I'm going to introduce some strong points of AFDEX. First, let me introduce how we can visualize the grain flow lines and use them for process optimal design. We developed a unique method to treat the grain flow lines not as a figure, but a function, so we can visualize them at arbitrarily close section immediately. So we can use this function as the objective function because normality of grain flow density, that is the gradient of grain flow function to the surface that is generated by an after material remover, is important. We assign these geometric parameters as design variables, and we obtain these optimized grain flows starting from these initial grain flows. For the second strong point, I'm going to introduce several multivariate problems. This example shows stress distribution in a bearing test process. Elastoplastic function was applied. The lateral displacement of the shaft was increased until plastic strain appears to some extent around here. A special mesh repairment scheme around the contact resin was applied. This is a conceptual process of assembly of 3 parts using 3 dies. A punch presses the material to form, and the binder die is imposing force on the material. This is another assembling process of a hub bearing unit using rotary forming. We can observe the residual stress after the rotating tool moved off. For the third strong point, I also prepared several multi-body problems with emphasis on joining purpose. This is a crunching simulation involving test process as well as joining process. In this example, we optimized the die shape in terms of pull force. This example is for joining a hollow part and solid shaft, one of extreme examples, because of large slide at the interface. A mesh repairment scheme along the contact surface was applied. An assembling process for bolt and nut with spring washer was simulated in this right example. You should note that some non-uniform stress distribution at almost final straw is due to the spanner or tool mark. The fourth strong point is the function of predicting denomination phenomena. Denomination phenomena of layered composite sheet was simulated using AFDEX 2D. A gyro motor was applied. The red line segments show the delaminated interface, which depends on bonding strength and exhibit a good tendency. The denomination in square curve drawing process was simulated. 3 different examples with different interface conditions were simulated and compared in these figures. For the last strong point of AFDEX, I prepared a tribological example. This is an example distinctly showing the convex shape at the bottom. However, when a constant friction condition was applied, a concave bottom part was predicted. A Korean research institute had tried to predict the concave bottom using various metal-forming simulators under the same conditions for 2 years, only to fail. So we used this optimized friction function of strain instead of the constant friction, and could obtain this result that is quite similar to the actual shape. I'd like to note that we optimized this initial function to maximize this length using hyperstudy and obtained this optimized function for coefficient of Coulomb friction. You can find some more details on this topic from Tribology International this year. Now, let me explain some schemes for plate forging simulation with verifications. In plate or sheet metal forming, the role of blank holder is important. In finite analysis, imposing some force on the surface is not so easy, especially when it is a function of displacement or straw. We thus develop a kind of penalty method to satisfy the magnitude of the exerted force and the interface condition at once. This figure shows conceptually the scheme. The force is imposed on the material depending the penetrated volume into the blank holder. With this scheme, we simulated a fine braking process. And we could obtain quite reliable solution in terms of shapes of the right side and the cavity, which should not be changed after passing through this deforming region. It's very important. Of course, layer mesh systems should be employed in simulating plate forging or bulk forming processes of sheet materials. First, we generate a triangular mesh system, and then tessellation with tetrahedral element is conducted after its extrusion. This is just for the sheet and this for clad matter case. There are many minor schemes for simulating forming processes of plate or sheet materials, but I'd better not explain them in more detail because of time limit. Anyway, I will show you typical applications which reflect them. When you use AFDEX, you will be automatically supported by such the schemes. We applied AFDEX to L bending and 3-point bending, which are simple but sensitive to the numerical schemes employed. We compared our predictions with those of ANSYS. We concluded that our predictions are acceptable. Of course, ANSYS predictions are not absolute references because there are no exact solutions. Marking simulation was conducted to be compared with the experiment in terms of the maximum length of the extruded part defined as camber. We found that AFDEX followed the experimental point with higher accuracy. A scale curve deep drawing process was simulated to investigate into the effects of number of layers on the predictions. We found that 2 is good for minimum number of layers in this case, as can be seen in this comparison. With a normally small binder rod, we obtain irregularly shaped material, as can be seen here. This is an example of a revetting process for aircraft application. The detail about this process was obtained from a PhD dissertation of the U.S. University. A comparison of forming load between our predictions with experiment in this figure shows an excellent agreement. Now I'm going to introduce some typical applications and give a conclusion. From application sense, the most important things for plate forging or sheet metal forming simulation by bulk metal forming approach include the diversity of die motions. From now on, I'm going to introduce some typical examples with emphasis on die motion. Just seeing is understanding or knowing, of course. In the first stage, in this case, the material is supported by light yellow plate with hydraulic cylinder or spring. In the second stage, light yellow die part pushes down the material by a spring, moving downwards first and then upwards. And finally, it moves down in the same velocity with a punch after 2 dies contact. In this example, in loading stage, a little darker blank holder in the upper side pushes down the material by exerting the given force in the earlier stroke, and it moves down with punch and press the material after the contact between punch and the binder is made along their interface. In the unloading stage, the reverse motions of punch and blank holder were realized while a spring back analysis was conducted. In this example, Motion of upper dies are almost the same with previous one. However, there is a combined die in the lower side which imposes force onto the material in the early stroke, but it will constrain the motion of material after it touches the bottom. In this example, the punch moves down with upper side die, which pushes down the pink color sleeve die after contact with it. This supporting die imposes the given force onto the material to push it upwards. The given force can be a function of its absolute stroke or relative stroke to the other die part. In this process, the main punch and side die move down initially in the same velocity up to a position and to this position. Then only side punch continues to move down while lower punch starts to move outwards from the position. In this process, two inner upper die parts move down in the same velocity, while the outer upper die pushes the material by the given force before contact with the other upper die part is made. Of course, after the contact, all die parts move down identically during loading action. During this loading action, this lower die supports the material with a given force, which may change with stroke or time. The ejection process was all simulated. Now let me introduce very briefly some typical applications. This is schematic diagram of plate forging of titanium clad aluminum plate. We started on fracture occurring at this corner and could obtain some meaningful results. The material was discretized into a layered mass system, as shown in this figure. Fine blanking or shearing process simulation, considering the consecutive forming process, is also important. We have kept improving our unique scheme to obtain good surface, considering both surface smoothness for its next use in consecutive simulation and accuracy of the cut surface at once. These two examples are enough to show the function of AFDEX. This is one of the examples of simulating the entire process. The process is not appropriate because of bad metal flow lines at this corner, which I believe caused this fracture. This kind of defect can be easily removed during process design using AFDEX. This shows an application example to a deep drawing process. This is a special example of impact extrusion of battery case. We compared the flow mark in the bottom side of the material, revealing a good agreement between experiment and predictions. Of course, modeling friction is of great importance in this kind of applications. As already introduced, we are supporting the users with a generalized friction function of pressure and temperature, as well as strain. Sheet metal forming process was simulated by a solid element approach. One of the hot issues in this field of sheet metal forming simulation is final analysis of the sheet metal forming process using solid elements. This kind of approach can solve the inherent defects of traditional sheet metal forming simulation technology based on shallower plate elements, for example, local thinning phenomena. In coining simulation, selecting proper number of mass is one of the important factors, which can make the surface accurate or blurry. To obtain a good quality of the coating simulation, we are working on increasing mass density on the selected surface and coarsening on the other surface. In plate forging process, where high pressure is exerted on the enclosed die surface, air trapping may happen, leaving some marks or remains which can be considered as non-standard cases. Finally, let me introduce an application to develop a typical plate forging process for an auto part. The entire process was simulated using elastoplastifying method with spring back considered in a fully automated way. Now, let me draw some conclusions. Bulk metal forming simulation of sheet materials and plate forging simulation are becoming more and more important year after year because of their better quality and cost effectiveness, especially in this age of environment-friendly fashion cars. The importance of final mass system, treatment of specially purposed die, and flexible die motions in this field was emphasized with appropriate applications. Metal forming is creativity itself, and customers are the source of our new ideas, especially of die motions and or functions. We thus need in-depth cooperation with our customers, as we are doing it successfully with pioneering users in this field. I would like to give special thanks to early users in Japan and Germany for their contribution of advance in plate forging simulation technology of AFDEX.